All right, let's take a little bit of time today to talk about a certain kind of approach. So, a certain kind of approach to getting what you want and to finding fulfillment in your situation, to actually getting in that sense of fluidity and alignment with what you want, where you feel like it's within your reach and you feel connected to what it is that you want. You're not projecting it into some distant future and spending all your time sort of scheming about how you're going to make and how this plan is going to be that, and you're kind of like writing down these goals, and that all has its place. And obviously it's really important to train our conscious minds to have a clear sense of practicality and how we can move forward. Like, that's a really important aspect of what we're doing. But what I notice a lot of the time with people is if they can't fit their life path, their life direction into these very practical boxes, they tend to just kind of act like it's not possible. Like, it's only possible if I can account for it all within the next 20 minutes with my conscious mind. And if I can't see how it's going to go, then it must not be possible. It must not be the right path for me. And this is just a scam, to be honest with you. This is just a complete scam. The reason it's a scam is because there's really only so much our conscious mind can pick up on. And to just assume that if something can't fit within these very small parameters and you can't foresee the next 3 or 4 steps ahead, and if you can't do that, then this is just the thing that you actually want, the thing that you're most called towards, the thing that your heart is saying the most, is just off the table, and we should just move on and do something else and maybe just like downgrade consistently. You see this kind of behavior a lot with this attitude, I think, is there's this sense of always trying to reduce what it is that you want down to a thing that seems more feasible. But the problem is when you have that kind of trajectory, when you have that kind of that pattern of just always reducing it down to try to make it more realistic, you don't really mean realistic. What you actually mean when you're doing that is you mean that you want to take it down to the point where it doesn't feel like it's out of your reach. But then if you don't have that level of ambition and you don't have that sort of positive charge towards something that's kind of like an ideal, something that's a little bit outside of your reach in a way, if you don't have that thing moving you or pulling you, there doesn't tend to be enough energy, there doesn't tend to be enough draw, enough magnetism to actually pull you out of just being stuck in what you're doing now. And when I say you, what I really mean is we. Someone left a comment on one of the last videos I posted, one of the last few, and they made a really good distinction where they were saying when you say you mean we. And I think that's totally true. I think that's just often the way I communicate it is by saying like you. But I mean we, because we're in this position together. This is a collective human thing. This is something that we do collectively. We tend to have this sense of always wanting to reduce and always wanting to fit things into these very narrow boxes and confines. So that's really the problem that we're going to be addressing throughout this video. I want you to settle in for that. I want you to be able to see consciously, if this is something that you're doing, how you may be reducing down and keeping, and we often hide behind that veneer, like I said, of trying to make things more realistic. But it's not really realistic because by definition, to be realistic corresponds to the reality of the situation. But the reality of the situation is subjective. The reality of the situation for one person is completely different to another. What seems impossible for one person and seems that it would never work for one person would totally work for another person. It's part of their everyday reality, right? Some people spend years looking for happiness, for example, and some people who have far less resources, far less going for them in the worldly sense, can wake up every morning with a smile on their face and feel a sense of happiness because their sense of reality is subjective. Their minds and their hearts are attuned to something that works for them. The sense of happiness and the sense of well-being that we're often seeking comes from when we have our situation serving us and when we can also serve the situation back. There's a kind of correspondence and collaborative relationship with life and with the people around us, where when we're always competing and we always feel like life's getting us, we're always trying to get it back and we're always trying to get a bit better than others. There's this constant scarcity and again this narrowing in. So I want to present an alternative view to that. I think we've kind of beat that horse to death. So hopefully you get what I mean. It's good to repeat things sometimes to get that sense of what we're talking about. Narrowing down and trying to make everything more practical, reducing it and trying to get it into these little boxes and confines. Again, there's a place for planning and there's a place for seeing ahead, but is it really the best strategy for actually being able to move into the kind of life and the kind of space, the kind of energetic space that you really want in life, and to really be who it is that you're here to be, to really become who it is that you want to become? Is that really the best way of approaching it? I would argue no. I would say that when it comes to what your heart is actually telling you, when it comes to those flashes you get intuitively of what it really means to be alive and what you're really here for, I would say that it's quite hard to just take that information and fit it into those boxes. Oftentimes it comes as it's sort of like a poetic communication from the universe itself. There's this sense of, oh, that's the thing. Or maybe one day, like, I'm just thinking of riffing off of an example off the top of my head. Maybe a friend invites you to like one of those like painting workshops where you can go have like a coffee and paint and just hang out with people. Maybe you just do this one brush stroke, and then all of a sudden it's like something strikes you right through your heart and you're like, I'm in love. There's something I love about this. Like, I feel alive in a way that I maybe haven't for a long time, just because I'm really connected here and I'm plugged in here. It's like it evokes me. And what we want to be able to do, we want to be able to get you to the point where you can hear that inside of yourself. You can hear that voice and you can honor that voice and you can pay credence to it, and you don't feel like you have to like dismiss it and suppress it and act like it's not realistic enough. So maybe I'll just paint once a month when I have the time, when I'm not suffering for everything else. And we want to look at it more from a perspective of like, how could I actually actively lean into this? How could we actually lean into this thing that we love and lean into this poetry that the universe is speaking to us through the language of our heart, through the language of our intuition? How do we lean into that more so that we can start to really garner the fruits of what it is that we love to do the most, so we feel that there's that sense of fluidity and alignment with our experience? And it reminds me of if you've ever read the book Flow by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. He's a Russian psychologist, and he explains really well how when it comes to this idea of flow and being in the optimal state of human experience, it's sort of a vescopisis between ease and challenge. So on one end, if you're too far, you have kind of anxiety and it's too much, and then on the other end, you have too much ease and it's like there's just nothing, it's not challenging you at all. And then there's this perfect middle, this vescopisis, where you're challenged just enough by the thing. So in a way, you are actually kind of leaning into your fear. Like, you're not trying to just remove the fear and like act like the anxiety is bad. You're actually kind of leaning into the thing you're afraid of. Like, maybe you do actually feel a bit afraid to paint and it feels a bit above you, or it feels a bit outside of you because you're not calibrated with it yet. You're not used to it. But you're actually finding that way of leaning into the experience. But what you notice with that balance is as you lean into the anxiety, it's like over time there starts to be more ease because you're being acclimated to the thing that you like. And that's kind of what we mean when we say flow. In order for us to have flow, what we really need, the better approach, the approach that I want to sort of present to you here today, is don't worry so much about all the answers and all the ways to do it and how you're going to plan it out. Consider your intention more closely. Like, what if there was a way that you could set an intention for something and you didn't need to consciously know all the steps of how it was going to happen, and just stay with me here. Like, if this is feeling like something that's a bit like, oh man, like I don't really know how to move with this, just see if you can move with what I'm saying here. Even just as a thought experiment, even just from another point of view. If you're a more practically oriented person, this will just be an interesting way of testing your mental boundaries in a sense here. Imagine that you set a certain kind of intention. So like the intention was, for example, I'm going to find the time to paint 3 times a week, and I'm going to go into that state of like just engaging with the art form. Even if I'm not good at it or like whatever, I'm just going to engage with that for 3 hours a week, 3 times a week, so 9 hours a week. And instead of planning out exactly how you're going to do it and what days you're going to do it and all that, like that'll all come. But just for now, you just have that intention and you just allow that intention of being in that space of being a painter. So it's not focusing on the thing that you're going to do so much. It's focusing on who you are. It's going into that being state. So instead of actually worrying so much about how you're going to make it happen, you start to place your consciousness, you start to sort of funnel your consciousness more into what it means to just be that way. And you can do this with your identity. So you start actually feeling what it's like to be that painter. You don't have to go crazy with it and take it too far. I mean, it can be interesting sometimes to extend that into different areas of your life, and that's its own thing. But in this case, what we're saying is we're just feeling into what it's actually like to be that way. So we're setting that intention of that's what we want. And when we say that's what we want, an even more intimate and more truthful way of saying it is that's who we are now. We're starting to align our identity with that. We don't have to think about it too much. We just align our identity with that sense of that's what I am, that's why I'm doing it, that's my intention. And then instead of trying to just take an inordinate megalomaniac level of responsibility for every single part of how it's going to work, what we do is we set that intention and then we release that intention out to the universe. So whatever your higher power is, I mean, it could be whatever religion that you follow, or maybe you're an atheist and you're just believing in like sort of the inherent chaos of existence and the sort of unstructured magic of being, you could say. Or like me, maybe you actually just feel like everything, or maybe you actually experience directly that everything is all taking place through this oneness, and maybe you lose track of it sometimes. But everything that you do, you experience it as, I'm thinking of the quote by Ram Dass where he says, God in drag. You endeavor to experience life in a way where it's like God in drag. When you speak to another, when you speak into the camera, when you go about your daily affairs, you treat everything as though it's one field of experience. Whatever that higher power is to you, you release that intention into that higher power. And with trust, the knowingness and the trust emanating from your heart, you just let it go and you allow it to occur. And then if you want to make a plan after of how you're going to do it and like how it's going to work, what's going to happen is the plan's going to be easier to set anyway, because there's an inherent sense of core safety and trust when you release the intention. When you set the right intention and you release it, there's an inherent sense of trust and core safety that comes with that. Where if you're just trying to plan it out and you're sort of like trying to battle all the alternatives and the odds out of the way and you're trying to manage everything, again, I used the word before, like megalomaniac, and it is in a way, there's a sort of megalomania that we have oftentimes. It's very common, trying to manage every single little detail of life. And what it actually ends up doing over time, you can see this in people, you can see they get like sort of tired under the eyes and they start to get sort of like gaunt. Like not just in their appearance, but energetically, I think some people get kind of gaunt because they're so busy gripping onto life so tightly that they don't actually allow for any like sort of fresh, renewable sort of energy to move through them or their life experience. So they just have this sense of always gripping onto things. And when you do that over time, it starts to break you down. And it puts an enormous amount of pressure and an undue amount of responsibility on just like the small amount of what you actually are, which we call our conscious self. Like we say me, my conscious self. I love that saying from Carl Jung. I actually believe this was actually one of Jung's contemporaries who'd said this. I forget his name. It's not coming to me right now. But this guy has a really good quote where he says, the basic way of explaining what the ego is the ego is like the light in the darkness. And from the broader Jungian perspective, what he means is there's this vast field of unconsciousness that's full of these sort of these sort of archetypes of life that relate to everyone, and every human moves through those archetypal patterns, these organizing patterns of the psyche. And then through all of that, we have this like one little like candle light in that massive infinite field of unconsciousness. We have this little candle light of a self. And when you actually consider it from that perspective, the reason I like that image, I want to paint that image for you here, is you start to consider like how futile it is to try to fit everything within that little candle light. And what happens when you do that is, whether you see it or not, you're losing trust for the broader universe. Like, you're not allowing the universe to correspond with you. And some of us wonder, like, some of us actually develop like a whole identity and a whole mentality just around like things not working for us, and how we're kind of like a victim, and things never work, and it's always been bad, and it will never get better. And it just narrows in further and further and further till it gets to this, like, you can see it sometimes, it becomes this like sort of dried husk that's so devoid of spirit, and so devoid of love, and so devoid of humanity, that it's just like it cannot resonate at all with sort of any like higher thought form, like something like hope or trust or faith or love, or just sort of like allowing things to move and flow. It's shocking sometimes how you'll see someone stuck in a certain situation, and when they actually, it's really amazing that when they actually get to the point where they just surrender, and they can do this consciously or not. Sometimes I've actually been in situations where things have been so fucked for me that I've actually just given up trying to fix it. Like, it's not like this apathetic giving up where you're like, oh, I guess I never fix it. It's actually just like you realize that the inordinate amount that's going on is beyond the capacity of that candlelight of your mind, of your psyche. And it's like there's just this deep sense of release where it's like that I have to kind of let Jesus take the wheel, so to speak. I have to let life assist me here. And it's like somehow, whether you make that shift consciously or not, when you allow life to start assisting you, and when you allow that sort of energy to move through you naturally, you're not trying to just like, you're not like now making the plan about letting the universe move through, like, right, how do I set more time aside to like meditate? It's like, it's not about that. It's actually just about coming to a point where you're able to see how you're doing this and sit with that in awareness. And just even like whatever way you want to do it. For me, actually, sometimes like I'm not a Christian or anything, but I'll just like actually put my hands together, and I'll kind of like just ask for assistance. I'll just kind of make my intention known and let go of the feelings that are subsequent to that intention. So there might actually be a feeling of doubt. Like maybe I actually feel like I need to manage everything right now because my situation is one where my survival is threatened, for example. And I'll kind of let go of that doubt and that apprehension, and it opens up your mental space and your heart space more. And it just feels again that you're in rhythm, you're in flow, like you're still in that challenge. Like I said before about Csikszentmihalyi, you're still in a state where you're being challenged, but it's met and counterbalanced by the opposite pole of ease. And you find that sort of great middle ground between the challenge and the ease. And you're on the razor's edge. And you're just kind of moving with your experience. You're not fighting your experience, but you're also not submissive and sort of just laying down with it and not caring, being apathetic. You're kind of moving with what's happening, and you're allowing life to guide you once again. And the more you begin to listen to this voice of your heart and your intuition, you know this when I'm saying it, I know you do. The more that you begin to listen to that, it's like the louder it gets, and like it's just like this this compounding effect. It's exponential. Like the more it happens, the more you can hear that, and you start to actually trust it. Like for me, I'm kind of at the point now where like I'll just be out and I'll notice like a park or something, and there used to be a time like maybe a few years ago even where I'd like be out and I'd be like too busy, and I like wouldn't let myself like, even though I'd have the sense of like, oh, it's a park, what I would do is I'd be like, oh, maybe next week I'll definitely go to that park. Yeah, I will. But now I'll just be like, what if I just moved something around right now and I just went to that park and I took my shoes off and I just like walked through the park and I appreciated the beauty of the park and was just present with it? Or what if like I saw that person, instead of being like, oh, maybe tomorrow when I feel like talking to people, what if you just actually was honest about how you felt and just communicated with that person? What if when you're making a YouTube video or something like that, or you're working on whatever your art form is, what if, instead of being like, oh, I'll have to find time for it, like, and just trying to like cramp it all, narrow it down into that little fucking box, what about instead of that, if you just opened up to it and was like, what if I just turn on the camera and start talking and start flowing and sort of find my rhythm with it? What if I just start painting? What if I just start writing? What if I just sit silently for an hour? It's very difficult to expand outside of the current circumference of your experience if you're not willing to try something different, or if you're not willing to hear and listen to yourself when you have that sort of communication moving through you. And yeah, that's pretty much going to sum it up. I hope you can garner the essence of it. In summary, we're saying you don't always need to have all the answers. It's still good to plan and have a sense of where you're going. And obviously sometimes that's super important. It's a really important aspect of your mind to develop. No one's denying that. But as your main operating principle, is planning and trying to cram everything, is that really actually what you want to be doing? Or if I gave you the option right now, if some genie, let's say a genie came down right now and gave you the option right now, click their fingers, gave you the option. It's like, would you prefer that and to take this inordinate amount of responsibility and try to cram everything into a plan so you know everything and you've kind of given up on the adventure and the mystery? Or if you could have like some ability to communicate at a deep level with the broader aspects of the universe through your intuition and through your heart, and you actually trusted that deeply, you had a deep intrinsic sense of trust in your own beingness, and almost like what would come to you when it needed to. And yeah, you'd still have to put in effort, but that effort would be experienced as a form of rhythm and dance and play rather than like fighting against life. If you could pick between those things, which ones would you really pick? Which option would you pick? I think it's kind of like self-evident to the majority of people that the latter is a better option. I think it's just one that you were not really exposed to as much. That's the point of this video, is I'm speaking from that place of what that's like and affirming it and repeating it again and again and again. And the idea here is that you'll get a sense of that state so you can pick up on some of it. And then maybe the next 2 weeks you won't think about this, and then all of a sudden you'll be at a park or something, you'll be painting something, and you'll notice, what is actually my intention? How do I set that intention there, put it out there, let it go, and allow it to flow through me instead of trying to grasp onto everything? So that would be my intention and my hope for you today. That's going to be everything for me. If you enjoyed this or if you got value out of this, I appreciate you subscribing to the channel and liking the video, and leave a comment down below. When you comment down below, even just like a little comment, something, just some stuff, it helps the algorithm churn the videos more. So I really appreciate that. It just sort of helps spread the word, get this out there more. I hope you're having a beautiful day, and I will see you very soon.